everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I have my April book haul. Not gonna lie, for the month of April, I have accumulated quite a bit of books. Let's just say a lot of pre-orders came in. There's just so many exciting releases coming out over the next, let's be real, like 8 months. My TBR is spiraling out of control, but nonetheless, I'm excited about all the books I'm going to be showing off today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first set of books I'm going to show off are, of course, the April Selects for Book of the Month, who is sponsoring this video. And if you're not familiar, Book of the Month is an online bookish subscription service, and essentially every single month they curate a selection of 5 titles from a variety of different genres, voices, and authors within the community. There are always new releases, they're always hardcover, and they're sent directly to your door. You can select your first book for $14.99 and add up to 2 additional titles at $9.99 each. They also have a huge backlog of titles to select from, but of course, if you're not interested for that particular month, very easy to skip. And overall, it's a service I have been using and loving for years. I, of course, have an offer code for you guys. If you use the code SPRINGFUN, you can get your first box for only $9.99. But without further ado, let's dive into the incredible titles for this month. I'm so jazzed about many of them. The first book I have to show off just sounds like an adorable rom-com that is perfect for the spring-summer months. I honestly cannot believe summer is truly right around the corner, but it is. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. Emily Henry is also well known for writing Beach Read, which is a very beloved rom-com that I personally want to get to pretty soon. It's a story that follows our main characters, Alex and Poppy, and they have nothing in common. She has insatiable wanderlust and lives in the big city. He wears khakis and prefers to stay at home and read a good book. But ever since a fateful car ride where they met in college, they essentially go on 1 trip a year together. These trips have always been a source of light for both of them, and they consider themselves the very best of friends. Until 2 years ago when Poppy messed it all up, and they haven't seen or talked to each other since then, but Poppy decides to take it upon herself and basically convinces Alex to go on one last trip. And she basically views this 1 week as a chance to kind of make everything right. This sounds like this is going to have travel and romance and friendship and hopefully just a fun, light read that will put a smile on my face. Again, I've heard excellent things about this author, so this is definitely one I'm excited to add to my shelf. The next book you're able to select from is The Hunting Wives by May Cobb. And this basically follows our main character, Sophie, who has recently left a very enviable and powerful position in Chicago, and she is recently relocated with her husband and young son in a small Texas town. She was looking forward to kind of living a slower paced, more rural life, but now she's kind of deciding that her life maybe is a little bit too quiet and she finds herself a bit bored. There she meets Margot, who is an alluring socialite in town, and she basically joins this hunting club of women, which involves martinis and late night target practice. And from there, Sophie begins to get drawn deeper in this group and her obsession begins to grow. However, when a body of a young teenage girl is discovered in the woods where the hunting wives meet, she finds herself in the middle of both a murder investigation and her life begins to spiral out of control. This sounds rather intense and very, very interesting. I'm curious about the Texas setting itself. I feel like it's kind of combining like rural socialite politics with murder. So that definitely calls out to me a bit, but this sounds like this would be a page turner and definitely a fast read. The next book you're able to select from is my personal favorite of the month, and that is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. This is the first book to a new cozy kitchen-based murder mystery whodunit series. Both of those things honestly call out to me in every way possible. I love that this centers food and also murder. And this basically follows our main character, Lila, who has recently moved back home to recover from a terrible breakup. And she feels like her life is kind of falling into classic rom-com tropes. She's taking on trying to revive a family restaurant, and in general, she feels like her life is a bit of a stereotype. However, when a notoriously nasty food critic, who also happens to be her ex-boyfriend, drops dead shortly after eating at her family restaurant, she now finds herself in the middle of an investigation. And all fingers are kind of pointing at her, so she decides to take this investigation on herself using her community connections to try to figure out what in the world is going on. This is said to basically shift from like a classic rom-com to almost like an Agatha Christie style novel. It sounds like it's full of family and humor and food. It truly sounds like a delightful time that I'm hoping also has a big twist as well. I don't know, this just sounds like a really unique unique and original story, and I cannot wait to pick this up. Next up is a more emotional family-based read, and that is What Comes After by Joanne Tompkins. And this is basically set in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, and recently 2 teenage boys have tragically passed away, which has kind of torn this community apart. Specifically, we follow 2 families who are neighbors who are each the family of one of these 2 boys, and at the beginning of the story they're kind of retreating internally, isolated within their own grief. When an unfamiliar pregnant teenage girl emerges out of the woods, she kind of acts as a bridge between these 2 families, bringing them together in their shared grief and tragedy. However, she appears to be hiding something herself that may actually be connected to the death of the boys. This, I believe, is about family, grief, and overcoming tragedy, as well as hope and forgiveness. I personally love family-centered literary fiction stories, so this is definitely one that intrigues me. It sounds like it's going to be really emotional, if I'm being honest, but one that is really powerful as well. And then the last novel I have to show off from Book of the Month this month is Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge, and this is said to be an unforgettable and incredible coming-of-age story following one young Black girl's journey and attempt to find a place where she can fully and only be herself. This follows our main character Liberty, who is a young, free-born Black girl coming of age in Reconstruction-era Brooklyn, and is all too aware of the dreams and the future that her mother sees for her, and that is to become a physician just like her. However, Liberty kind of dreams of a different future, one of music and art. So when she's presented the opportunity to marry a man and move to Haiti after he promises her that she can be his equal on the island, but she quickly realizes that she is still subordinate to him and all the other men living there. And from there, she tries to parse what freedom actually means for a Black woman. Liberty struggles with where she might find it for herself and for generations to come. This honestly sounds like an incredibly gripping novel. The author has won so many awards for some of her previous works, so I suspect that this is also incredible. I also hear that this is rich with historical detail. It's also inspired by the life of one of the first Black women physicians in the United States. It's definitely one I've also heard really strong reviews about, so I am really happy to add this to my shelf. Alrighty guys, those are the 5 titles you're able to select from for Book of the Month this month. Again, I will have the discount code as well as a link to their site down below. But let's go ahead and dive into the rest of the titles I have picked up. I'm not kidding, there's just so many books I want to read. I don't know when it's going to stop, so let's just go ahead and dive right in. First book I have to show off is The Arm of the Sphinx by Josiah Bancroft. This was a obvious pickup and buy. After I read and loved the first one, Senlin Ascends, earlier last month, this definitely feels like a series I'm going to marathon throughout the year, but this essentially follows our main character Senlin, who is a mild-mannered school teacher who essentially has always dreamed of visiting this Tower of Babel, which is this enormous structure full of all these different floors, kind of run by different political powers and governments, and each floor kind of has its own distinct and sinister air about them. This dream finally comes true as he travels there with his new wife on their honeymoon. However, once he arrives, they get separated and he begins this quest to try to locate her in this tower. Throughout the first one, we see him kind of venture through the first couple of floors and gets thrown headfirst into the perils and politics of this tower. The writing is incredibly whimsical and magical, and you fall in love with Senlin as well as fall in love with the romance at this story too. I loved the first one. It was so imaginative and so detailed, so I picked up the second one. I'll be picking up books 3 and 4, I'm sure, later this year, but I had to grab this because I just loved the first one so much, and I actually plan to read this rather soon. Next up is a new-ish YA fantasy release that kind of fell off my radar. I completely forgot this came out earlier this year, and that is A Vow So Bold and Deadly by Bridget Kemmer. This, of course, is the 3rd and final book to A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which is a YA fantasy angsty series that I personally have really enjoyed over the years. And this follows our main character Harper, and the first one is basically pulled to an alternate fantasy world in an attempt to break this evil curse on the prince that presides there. It's very much like a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but because she's kind of pulled from our modern world and reality, there's a lot of humor and kind of nods to the fact that this is a well-known kind of fantasy space, so she kind of uses references from our life to kind of inform how she should act. This is full of angsty YA romance, some pretty solid politics, and twists and turns within the plot. I personally really enjoyed the first 2 books. I found them to be very entertaining, so I'm curious to see how this will wrap itself up in this 3rd and final installment. As I will say, this is a series that definitely has kept me very entertained and at points guessing as well, so I did grab this. Next up, I have a new release I've actually seen a few comments about. A few of you guys have been telling me that I would love this book, so I bought it, I'm listening. And that is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. And this is a new adult fantasy release. And I have to say, I love that it came out in paperback first. Like, this style of paperback is my favorite type of book binding. Let it be known. And this just sounds like the first installment of a new dark fantasy series I feel like I'm going to love. It also kind of has this historical Venetian vibe that really, really calls out to me. This follows our main character, Ren, who is a con artist. And she has come to the sparkling city of Nadazera with one goal, and that is to trick her way into the noble house to secure herself and her sister a future. However, her masquerade is one of many. As corrupt nightmare magic begins to weave its way through the city, she kind of finds herself in the middle of a very dangerous plot in the dark underbelly of this world. This just sounds like a dark heist fantasy novel I feel like I'm going to love. I love when thieves are kind of at the center, and I really appreciate like thief and merchant politics within fantasy settings. I feel like this book has a lot of that, but we shall see. I've heard really, really excellent things again from you guys, so I picked this guy up. Next up, I have two sci-fi novels I've heard excellent things about, and I'm hoping just continues to expand my sci-fi knowledge and experience, if you will. The first one is A Memory Called Empire by R.K.D. Martin. This won the Hugo Award last year, and it's a very beloved and very lauded first book to a new sci-fi series. I've read a lot of Earth-centered sci-fi tales recently this year, and I'm really trying to expand beyond that and kind of go more into the stars, if you will. In a lot of ways, that kind of appeals to me more as an epic fantasy reader. I like the idea of like a new world, a new planet with its own politics and issues kind of at play. But this essentially follows our main character, Mahit, who is an ambassador, and she is traveling and very eager to take up her new post in a faraway planet. But when she arrives there, she quickly realizes that her predecessor has died, and no one will admit that his death was not accidental, or if our main character will be next. So now our main character is kind of thrown into the middle of this planet's politics, trying to actively solve a murder mystery and also keep herself alive. This just sounds really, really intriguing, dark, twisty, and turny. And again, I've heard just excellent things, so I picked this up. I know the second one comes out later this year, so I'm hoping to read this in the next couple of months, but yeah, I grabbed this. Next is a book I picked up immediately after I saw Starla talk about it on their channel, and that is Vegabonds by Hao Jingfang. I'm not gonna lie, the synopsis of this book is also what really sold me, which is a bit ironic because it's incredibly vague, but in a way that just like makes you wanna know what happens. It essentially has 3 dates. The first one is colonize Mars, breaks away from Earth, beginning another Cold War, one based on the Iron Curtain of space, and then a delegation of young Martians, including the consul of Mars' granddaughter, is sent to live on Earth for 5 years in an attempt for reconciliation. And the last year is once these delegates return to Mars, they no longer belong to either Mars or Earth. The delegates basically struggle to understand the purpose of this overall conflict itself. Vegabonds is a work of literary fiction that transcends the genre. Hao has created a novel of political intrigue and philosophical dissonance that speaks to a generation of readers who find themselves continually displaced within our current culture. Again, I've heard incredible things about this. It's already really popular internationally, but was just recently translated into English. So I got this, and this is a book I really hope to read at some point this year. Again, I really just want to read some sci-fi that will make me question everything about my life, you know what I mean? Next up is a book I picked up after watching Monica's channel. I was very influenced about the books I wanted to buy, clearly, from some of my favorite channels this month. That is The Court Dancer by Kyung Suk Shin. This is a novel that is actually based off of a true story. In it, the author essentially imagines the life of a dancer, Yi Jin, who was the jewel of the court during the Joseon era, and essentially follows her life as she leaves Korea and actually moves to Paris. There, she essentially escapes the gilded cage of court life and begins to be immersed within Parisian culture, translating Joseon era works into French. However, even in this new world, homesickness and sorrow still awaits her. This is said to explore themes of exoticism, assimilation, and identity, and at its core, The Court Dancer examines what countries lose in identity in exchange for technological advancement. I've heard really great things about this. Monica, I think, is also planning to read this in the next couple of months. I basically saw it again on her channel and bought it right away. So yeah, I grabbed this. Next is another fantasy pre-order that recently came out. This is one of my most anticipated fantasy releases of the year, and that is The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This essentially is a dual perspective fantasy story following 2 characters. One is Luca, and she is in need of a turncoat. Someone desperate enough to tiptoe the bayonet's edge between treason and order, and also someone who can convince rebels to overthrow her uncle off the throne. And our other main character character is Turain, who is a soldier, and I think their lives and fates begin to intertwine. I've heard this is full of action and adventure and possibly romance as well. I also hear this has a really interesting political landscape. It's kind of a crumbling empire, I believe, is centered within the story. Again, this is one I've been highly anticipating, so I'm excited to have this first book to a new epic fantasy story in my hands. But yeah, obviously bought this. Next up is another pre-order that came this month, and that is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aiden Thomas, who is the author of The Cemetery Boys, which I read last fall and loved so much. Just one of the sweetest, most adorable stories out there. But his new release really caught my eye because it's actually kind of a dark, whimsical YA retelling of Peter Pan, and all of those things really greatly appeal to me. And in general, I already know I love their writing so much. This is set in a small Pacific Northwest town, and 5 years ago, Wendy and her two brothers got lost and disappeared in the woods. Wendy herself returned, but with no memory of what happened to the woods or where her brothers are now. 5 years later, children are beginning to disappear again, and this mystery is beginning to engulf this town once more. I hear this is whimsical and magical and dark. I also personally love kind of fairy tale or classic tale retellings and kind of an updated setting, so I feel like I'm gonna really love this. I of course have already heard all of the amazing things from early reviewers and readers who have already read it as well, so this was a must buy for me. And then the last book I have to show off is stunning. I'm not gonna lie, I personally think it's one of the prettiest books I now officially own, and that is this incredible bind up of His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. It has the Golden Compass, the Subtle Knife, and the Amber Spyglass all wrapped up in this beautiful, very classic looking hardcover. I mean, look at the spine of this. This does not just feel like, wow, am I in an archive at Oxford right now? But it just, I saw it, I bought it, I needed it, all right? But I also grabbed this because I want to begin my reread of this particular trilogy in the next month or so I wanted to have all three on hand to be able to do so, and this was my favorite edition I came across. But yeah, Golden Compass and the His Dark Materials series was one of my favorite growing up. It absolutely blew my mind when I read it all those years ago, but honestly, I have forgotten quite a bit, and I do feel like it's resurfacing a bit, at least with some of the reviewers I follow, and everyone is loving it again upon a reread, so I kind of want to join the bandwagon. The first one, The Golden Compass, is a classic coming-of-age story. We follow our main character as she goes on a journey to try to save her lost best friend. Through her, we battle with who to trust and who to rely on. This world is also really whimsical, full of magical technology, and also these creatures called daemons, which are sort of magical animal companions. I really loved this trilogy the first time I read it, so I'm excited to reintroduce myself to it because I feel like I might take even more from it as an adult. Just a true classic. Everyone's got to check this series out. Alrighty guys, that is my April book haul. Let me know down below some books you've picked up recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!